Welcome to American Gypsy Podcast. I'm your host, Gypsy, and today I have a special guest, Chris Wasko. She is a spiritual counselor, energy healer, and psychic medium. Welcome to the podcast, Chris.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Glad to have you here. And so, what does it mean to be an energy healer, and how did you get into this path?
Well, energy healing is about connecting to another individual energetically. So for me, I do it via the aura and the chakra system. So when I connect with a client, I am connecting my heart and my solar plexus chakra to their heart and solar plexus chakras. And I am then able to feel what blocks they might have, what traumas they may have, where it originated, and even get some of the story. So when I was initially doing this, I really didn't quite know what it was. I just knew I could do it, and because I trusted my feelings, and that's a lot of how these messages come through. And as far as how healing goes, is I really help to people to understand where these are stuck in their body and then give them different practices to help them release it. And it will really vary by individual.
And do you have to be in person, or can you do it online?
It could be anywhere. Most of my clients are actually online.
Okay. How did you get into this line of work?
Oh, that is such a good question because I feel like it was almost accidental. I mean, my
Mm.
past is business past. I majored in business. I worked in business. It was a very lucrative line of work for me, and I really appreciated it. But uh, when I became a mother, things changed a lot for me. I felt that the drive to become successful and become financially independent wasn't my priority anymore. It was about being a good parent, being a good mother. And when I was really just moving into this journey into motherhood, it helped me recognize a lot of things in myself that I needed to heal and recognize how traumatic my childhood was, how I was still in fight flight mode and having trauma responses be revealed to me through my own parenting methods. And I recognized I needed to heal that. So I did a lot of self work and healed a lot of myself, a lot of my nervous system, a lot of those trauma responses. And ultimately, I cut off my narcissistic parents. And doing all of these things in the course of several years opened me up more to spirit. This is when I started seeing people in spirit. That wasn't something I was able to do before. I wasn't one of those people that's like, oh, yeah, I was doing it all the time growing up. Like, no, I was not. I had moments for sure that in hindsight are much clearer, but at the time I would have dismissed it as coincidence. So really it was my own healing journey that led me to ultimately work to heal others.
Mm. That's interesting perspective because I like that you came from a different world of, business world, which is probably most of the time you're thinking more logical, and this kind of feels a little woo-woo. So it's good to get a perspective from that sense. I work in the tech world, so sometimes spirituality and in that community is not so prevalent.
No, it's not generally accepted. I think even that's why I probably dismissed it for a while because to me it wasn't logical. I needed it to make sense. I wanted to understand it. Even still, as I would say, I'm more woo-woo now. I still like to understand things at least to a point where it feels right in my heart. I'm like, okay, this makes sense. This sits right with me.
Yeah. And when did you begin to trust in your abilities to take it to the next level of helping others with it?
I think it was more others that helped me with that because I had a lot of people tell me how I helped them. And, in the beginning, I was really just helping friends. And they would tell me how much I helped them understand themselves, understand their children. And that was probably a big turning point for me, because I didn't realize how often I hear the inner thoughts of people. And so it was really easy for me to tell people, you know, this is what your child is thinking, and this is what you're thinking, and here's the disconnect of why this communication is not working. So it was really encouragement from those people at that time that said, you know, you have a gift, you should be doing something with this. And I had no idea what that something was going to look like. So at that time, I just started taking classes to understand how psychic ability worked, and mediumship ability worked, and how it worked for me, because it works differently for everybody.
Yeah. I heard you say somewhere like the more someone heals, the more they unintentionally um go in their spiritual journey, and which I really resonated with. I feel like I've kind of been into spirituality for years, but I realized more recently, the more I unintentionally kind of did some interpersonal work and healed some things, I unintentionally kind of woke up some things that I felt like I was trying to reach in the past, but couldn't quite get to, and now I just kind of unintentionally got there. But for those who are not familiar with spirituality, or haven't done any shadow work or trauma healing, what does that look like, and what advice would you give them, and how to get started about healing some of those things?
Well, I love the way you brought it up, because it really talks about energy. Energy is
Mm,
layered. And when we have elements of trauma, when we have elements of conditioning, those create layers in our energy body, if you will. Some might
mm,
refer to that as your aura. You know, I think the energy body is more than the aura, but for all intents and purposes, you know, your energy body is going to have different layers. So as you start to face these elements of yourself, the conditioning, the trauma, the, you know, just effects of negative experiences, even positive experiences, but you're facing them in a way where you're recognizing where you have triggers, and you're helping to work through those triggers. You're recognizing trauma responses. You're learning to work through those trauma responses. They break down those outer layers. So as those outer layers start to break down, now you are becoming more sensitive to this supposed unknown world that is the divine, that is spirit, whatever you want to call it. But you become more connected because your energy body, those outer layers, are now more clear. So that's why when it comes to healing, I don't believe we're ever fully healed. I believe we could spend a lifetime healing and just be on this healing journey, but you're uncovering these layers. So as one layer goes away and you become more open, then something else comes up that you didn't even realize was a trigger before, because it was under an outer layer that was more prominent and needed addressing. That's really how energy works. It's the outer layer that basically tells you this is what you need to pay attention to. It's kind of like when your body is sick, if you have headaches and stomach aches at the same time, we tend to go towards the one that bothers us more, the one that's more prevalent, the one that hurts. You know, we're going to kind of face that first, and then we'll heal that, hopefully. And then the other one, maybe we'll go away with it, or we'll then focus on that more, or we heal those things, and then something else comes up, like you're getting some weird spasm in your leg. And, you know, it's all connected.
yeah. And how do you, I guess, get to that? Are there things that can help you gain more awareness of these things? Because especially even men, they tend to bottle. I recently had a friend that's like, how do you work on that? I just bury my feelings, and that's how you be a man, you know? And so like, how does one like get to that point of becoming more self-aware to even know that there's trauma and layers that they need to heal?
Well, just that even statement in itself, someone that's saying they bottle up their emotions, there's a reason for that. And there's probably a layer of trauma connected to that. Who told you you shouldn't share your emotions? Who told you you
Mm,
can't feel? Who told you that is how to be a man?
mm,
And that, and again, that's also a form of conditioning. We condition men in this society to not feel. and you need to be tough. You need to brush it off and, get back up and, walk it off, or whatever the case may be. Those are forms of conditioning, and forms of conditioning create these layers. So really it's facing those elements within yourself. So for one person that's been told not to behave a certain way and not to feel, then they probably need to look at the whys. Like, what is the underlying element to that? Because usually that's generational. Like you have a son whose father told them to be that way because their father told them to be that way. So that's a generational pattern. But where did that originally start from? Why did they need to shake it off? Usually that stems from war. They had to get up. They had to keep fighting because it was survival based. So now when it passes down through generations and it's no longer a survival tactic, but the body still recognizes it as such, it's up to that person to work on that and to heal that. So they're releasing a generational trauma and pattern.
And is this a combination of therapy / energy work? Like, I know you had to go through a different journey because you're a healer and you're working towards a certain goal. But for someone who's trying to heal their traumas and do some self-development work, what would you recommend that they seek, I guess?
I really think it depends on the person, because there are people that will do really well with therapy. There are people that shun therapy. So I really think they need to trust that inner guidance. So if they are feeling they should go to therapy, then do that, make that their first step. But if they're feeling something else, like they need to go to the gym and work out more to release energy, then maybe that's where they're at the moment. I just don't believe in forcing healing, because there is no one path. Even my path wouldn't be something that would heal someone with the exact same experiences, because it's just what has helped me doesn't mean it's going to help the next person. So, like when I have a client, for example, and I'm going to read their energy, I'm going to know very quickly the type of things that are going to help them. And more often than not, it's elements about calming the nervous system. Recognize your trauma responses. Do you fight, flight? Do you freeze, fawn? That's working with your nervous system, because your nervous system is what's responding to that. So, and people could look that up, just nervous system healing techniques. And it's not too difficult to recognize what your trauma response is when you understand trauma responses generally.
Yeah, and I think that's important to highlight. Like, everyone's healing journey will look different, and different stages of your healing journey might require a different set of tools or
Exactly.
activity or ritual. That's one thing I realized. You mentioned earlier about surviving a narcissistic abuse, and I know you specialized in old souls and narcissistic abuse survivors. For those who might not be familiar with narcissistic abuse or haven't identified it in their own life, what are some things the survivors struggle with when they leave this paradigm?
Well, I believe one of the things that isn't discussed enough is the fact that narcissism is a spectrum. I believe we are taught narcissist in the grandiose way and the egotistical way. But when you recognize that narcissism is a spectrum, you can have a covert narcissist, you can have an overt narcissist, they could lay somewhere in between along that line. So that is one thing that really helps when someone's beginning to identify, am I encountering a narcissist? Do I have narcissistic tendencies, right? And from there, it's just really then looking at the pattern. What is the pattern of behavior? Because when it comes to narcissism, there is always a pattern of behavior. Now, for the overt narcissist, it tends to be very dramatic, where it'll be really wonderful and beautiful and they're great and everything is just amazing. And then they snap, like out of nowhere, they just melt down over something sets them off. And then that's like that downward spiral. Like when someone thinks like, oh, should I leave this person? Should I, I don't understand. Should I change myself? Can I do something better? And then again, it just goes into that pattern again. So it really depends on how you in that situation are dealing with it. And again, it goes back to trauma responses. So, are you a fighter? Are you going to fight that person? Like, don't snap at me. I didn't do anything. Are you going to freeze? Like, I don't know what to do here. You're going to leave, walk out. That's a flight. Like, I'm not dealing with this. I'm walking away. Or fawn, that's a pleaser. I'm going to do everything I can to help you not be upset. Can I get you a sandwich? Can I get you a drink? Do you want to go out somewhere? So it's recognizing your own responses first. And then how do you want to deal with that? Do you want to work on a relationship with this person? Do you, in some cases, people don't have a choice, especially if they're co-parenting. They're still living with the person. If you're raised in such an environment and you, for whatever reason, can't leave, the first thing is really recognizing your own responses and how to help your nervous system in those situations, because those patterns condition you and they program your behaviors.
Mm. Yeah, and I know if you stick around long enough, you start to pick up some of the traits. So
you do. Yeah.
What are some things, can you talk about your personal journey of narcissistic abuse and how you kind of transitioned out of that and into your healing journey?
Well, growing up, I never realized my parents were narcissists because they were just my parents. That was my normal. And a lot of people in those environments don't see it. It's like this, there's a common term of you're wearing rose-colored glasses and you don't really see things clearly until you take those off. And mine didn't really come off until much later, till after I became a parent myself and I saw the tendencies in me that I recognized were not healthy, but were conditioned from my childhood. My dad is on the overt side of the spectrum. So he's incredibly volatile, violent, just nasty. The meanest things that have ever been said to me in my life have been said by my own parents, more so my dad. My mom is on the covert side. So she is very manipulative. She is a very good liar. And she's very good at playing the victim. So it was really interesting because for so long I grew up really believing I was the problem. And not to say that I was this perfect child. I certainly do not want to paint myself as the ideal, but that is also why I work with old souls. Anyone who has an old soul child, that's the kid they're complaining about. And I just know whenever anyone comes to me and they start saying that their child is challenging, I'm already tuned in and like, that's very likely an old soul, because most people that find me are either have some sort of narcissistic abuse in their life, or they identify as an old soul, or they're raising an old soul. And as far as just healing from it, it just took me so long to recognize it wasn't me. I had so much self-hatred and felt like I shouldn't be here, that my family would have been better off without me. That is how I was raised to feel. I remember times as a teenager, because I had a very severe skiing accident when I was 15, and it's pretty much a miracle I survived. The actual accident and things that happened to me in the hospital, I almost died twice. And I remember times after that, I would just, pray and ask, why did I survive this accident? My family would have been better off without me. And it usually came after really bad events that my parents would have done or said to me. And I just, I hated myself for a long time. And it wasn't until I came to this really out of their house that I recognized, wow, people actually do love me and they do consider me a good person, and I am a good person. And it was really those steps for myself of like, wow, like this person doesn't see me as a problem. And then when these people started to show me things like, I would share stories of my upbringing and they would have this look of horror on their face. Like, Chris, that's not okay. That's not normal. And, just little bits like that. They were almost like breadcrumbs I was given over the course of my life of people telling me these things. And, but when it's your parents, you want to believe that they love you. You want to believe that there's just some genuine emotion there in the positive realm. And I think just from my case is my parents were so incredibly wounded as people, and they never dealt with their own traumas. So they were parenting from a place of trauma. And really, that was a pivotal moment for me. I needed to recognize for myself, if I am parenting from a place of trauma, I'm not doing myself any good, and I'm certainly not benefiting my children. So that was a big turning point for me and a big part of my healing journey.
And it's probably helpful too for your own healing to identify that they were just hurt people that hurt people and they were
Hurt people.
dealing with their own trauma. So that kind of helps you have some sympathy and helps you feel like, okay, it's not because I'm a horrible person. No, that person was also, going through stuff.
Yes, so well put. Exactly. Hurt people hurt people. And I think it's important to not play victim. I certainly had my time of feeling like a victim. And I think it's important to transition that, it's okay to be a victim. It's okay to recognize where you've been hurt and where you've had pain, but transition to a survivor, because it makes you stronger and it makes you embody yourself. And it's a really big part of the healing process.
I know building like your self-image after coming out of these paradigms is one of um, probably important thing, but also challenging. What are some things that helped you kind of rebuild your self-image and perspective about yourself?
I think it really starts with these baby steps, these really small steps to teach yourself that you're worthy of love, that you're lovable. So it really is a self-love practice. And in the beginning, depending on your previous circumstance, you're probably not going to believe it. I remember I would say, affirmations over and over. I love myself. I love myself. I love myself. And I would say it, and I know, like, my body would fight it. And it's recognizing that if your body is fighting that, it's because you now have to do the work to convince yourself that you are worthy, you are lovable. It's not for other people to show you that. It is for you to teach yourself that. And that was, I think, for me in the beginning, a little bit of the slap in the face. I was looking for people to love me. I needed love. But what I was truly learning is that if I wanted it, I had to give it to myself first. And the more I gave it to myself, the more I saw it outside.
Yeah, because if you seek validation and love from others and see that as self-love, well, one is codependency, but also like it kind of takes you off track,
It does.
and in a spiral and always seeking attention. But like self-love is a lot easier if you can, like you said, prove it to yourself, and you have to really prove it to yourself because by actually taking action and doing things that make you proud.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's
Yeah.
why I do a lot with energy healing, because we have so much that gets stuck inside, so if you need to purge something from inside of you, then it's about releasing that and then loving yourself at the same time, and telling yourself like, I'm releasing the old and taking in the new. And now you're changing your cellular makeup, and you are changing your cells to recognize this new aspect, this new love vibration that you did not have before. So that is why it's such a process, and why I believe baby steps are so important. It's kind of like when people are working to lose weight, if they do something too drastic, there's a high probability that they're going to just gain the weight back. Same thing with energy healing. The little steps over time are going to chip away and help your body recognize this new version of you and accept it instead of fight it because it's not used to it. even if it's good for you. That's the crazy part about it. We think like, oh, it's good for us, so I have to now dump it all on and, you know, make my body accept it. But if your body is not used to it, because it's used to trauma, it's used to a trauma response, it's going to say, nope, this is not safe. And even if it's love, it's really those baby steps that are so valuable.
Definitely. And can you talk about, I guess, what does a typical energy healing session look like? And what are some services that you offer to people?
Well, I would say it varies, but to try to generalize it, what I do is I will give someone a questionnaire prior to meeting with me, because and it's very basic questions like, what is your favorite color? What's your favorite animal? Because this is vibration connected to you. And when I read this, I now can connect to your vibration more. So it actually saves me time, you know, as opposed to say like therapy, when you spend the first couple therapy sessions in this getting to know you. For me, the write-up is the getting to know you, because now I'm jumping into your energy. So I'll feel things. I'll feel if there's a trauma in this life. I'll feel if there's a trauma in a past life, and I'll just make my notes on the write-up before ever meeting with you. And then when I meet with you, I will just kind of give that little bit of a rundown. Like, so for example, okay, I'm feeling a lot of stuck energy in your heart chakra. And when I look at this, I'm feeling a connection to male energy, and this brings me to dad. And then, you know, in order to save time, I'm like, can you just tell me a little bit about your relationship with your father? And that's usually when they're like, oh, I have a terrible relationship with my dad, or I don't have a relationship because I cut him off, or like, okay. And that's the outer layer that I talked about, because it's always the outer one, that one that's hitting me first, that tells me this is what we need to look at first. When I'm working with kids, it's a little different, because I really want to be very sensitive to where they're at. So like, for example, I had he was a 15-year-old boy recently. His layer was his dad. And I asked him, I said, you know, are you okay if we talk about your dad? And he said, no. And I said, okay, no problem. So we adjust and shift. And, you know, and in those cases, I always have parents' approval. I don't do this for kids without parents. I just feel that disclaimer is important. So then as the session goes on, I will work through how to release a lot of what's stuck, a lot of what's coming up. And I will send a little bit of like, I'll call it homework of, here are things you could work on at home. And these little things, like I said, these little baby steps that you take will work on healing your energy each day. And generally people will meet with me once a month, because every month as they work on these practices, or not, it really depends. You know, some people will do it religiously, and other people will be like, oh, I read it and I just didn't really want to, or I didn't have the time. So, but their energy will have adjusted accordingly. And we just go from there. And then we look at what other layers are revealing themselves, what new things have come up. You know, the aura is very sticky. So it's amazing the things that kind of come into it. So, you know, like I had a client the other day, she thought, you know, our session was going to be about her job, but her boyfriend was very relevant in all of her energy. And I was like, can we just really quick talk about this? Because it's everything that's coming up right now for me. So that's why I say it's always very individual. But ultimately, I really want to help people be in a position to heal. So I give them a lot of healing tools. Over time, we grow this toolbox of, here is your healing toolbox. You know, you now know what you need to do to work on yourself, to work on healing that energy, and to, you know, just shift these traumas to where now you're in this position of feeling much stronger, much more connected to yourself. Because really what it ultimately does, it unifies that energy, because so many people come to me with split, blurred, or broken, like fractured energy, and I help repair that. They might not be able to see or feel it, but I can, and I help shift that. And they'll feel it ultimately, because they notice the practices and they notice things in their life changing. So I love those emails of, oh, you helped me so much. So it's really a great process.
Yeah, that's very interesting. You mentioned earlier, like about you work a lot with old souls. How do you know someone is an old soul?
It really depends on the person. It's much easier to identify an old soul child because they don't have a lot of the stuff we take on as adults that affect our energy. So an old soul child is pretty easy, just how they vibrate, their the feeling they give off. They have a heavier energy to them than, say, a younger soul, and even a more evolved soul. Even though, so there are some old souls that are just more evolved that won't give off the same energy, but that type of old soul is not likely to come to me unless they have the kind of parents I did. So that will just depend. But old souls generally have personality traits. They tend to be very introverted, or I like to call them more of an ambivert. And that's really the type of person that is more often than not introverted, but when they are with people they connect with, they are extremely outgoing. So I would definitely say old souls are more ambiverts than introverts, but a lot of them do identify as introverts because they haven't necessarily found their tribe, as you would call it, or their soul family. They tend to have an intensity to them. They are fiercely loyal. They are incredibly honest, sometimes seemingly to a fault, because they just don't lie. They don't like lies. They're sensitive to lies. They can read energy. They could sense things about people, and they will like or not like someone without really even having spoken to them and just know. So there's these little kinds of traits, personality traits that identify people as old souls. And then people that tend to find me, they're already somehow feeling connected to the work I do, that they'll just really give that away very quickly of like, oh, I have narcissistic parents, or I am married to a narcissist and I'm raising an old soul child. Because to raise an old soul, you don't necessarily have to be an old soul, but you likely are. Just the child is very likely older than you. So it does vary because, you know, energy is always interesting, but that's the best way I could generalize it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I know you wrote a book called Old Soul's Journey. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so An Old Soul's Journey is a book that looks and sounds like a children's book, and you know, it certainly is in ways, and I really do hope children feel connected to it. But it is also very much a inner child healing book. So I do see many adults connecting to this because it has a very high vibration to help your energy heal. That it's this reminder that life is not always easy, and we all know this, but it's also the reminder that we are supported, we are loved, and that we go through our hardships and it feels very isolated and very lonely, but we are not alone. We are on this path for a reason. We choose our paths for a reason. And I always say old souls tend to pick the most difficult lessons, and that is why life can feel really hard for them. And this is a reminder that you choose the hard lessons for a reason, and that's okay. And it will, on a human level, feel so difficult, but on a soul level, you're so proud of yourself. You just don't see it yet.
Yeah. Well, Chris, thank you. That was a very informative podcast. I definitely learned a lot. Before we close it out, is there anything you want to leave the audience with? Anything, any services or anything you're promoting where they can find you?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone wants to find me on my website, it's www.chriswasko.com. And I'm also on Instagram and Facebook at Chris Wasko Medium. So I like to put things on there to just, I don't know, help people understand a little more about what I do. But yeah, I generally do energy healing. I do psychic mediumship readings. That is not my primary because I like working with the living more than the dead. So that is just something it's on there as my service menu, but most of what I do is energy healing and just, you know, helping people heal because I love helping others. So I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast. And for the listeners, I will have Chris's and our information on the description. As always, if you want to be a guest, you can find us at americangypsy@gmail.com. And you can find us on all podcast platforms. Thank you for listening. Peace.